Today's daf is Nun Dalid, and we're going to start here on Nun Gimel Amid Beis, and we're going to count up from the bottom. My timer: 8 lines up from the bottom of page Nun Gimel Amid Beis. My timer. So we're trying to understand something which is called Drom Mizrachi. Drom Mizrachi is the southeast corner of the Mizbeach. And we said in the previous Hugya here on Nun Gimel that this part of the Mizbeach has no yisod, there's no base. And the Gemara asks my timer, why was there no base there? Omer Abelazar, Lefi shelo hoisa bechelko shel toref. So the word toref here is a reference to the Birchas Yaakov that he gave to the Shvatim in Parshas Vayechi, and the specific bracha that he bestowed upon Binyamin was Ze'ev Yitrof. And the Gemara is now darshaning in the name of Abelazar what this Ze'ev Yitrof, what is this Toref? Toref means to grab onto something, to tear it away, to pull it away. And Lo Hoisa Bechelko Shel Torif, the southeastern Yesod, or that territory, that Karka, was not in the Chelik of Binyamin. So it means that the entire Mizbeach area was situated on the territory of Binyamin, with the exception of one particular corner of the Mizbeach, which is called Dromis Mizrachis, the southeast corner. Rashi has a little bit of a diagram here, which is somewhat helpful. And if you'll take a look, you'll see that in Rashi's diagram, he's got the Mizrach, the Mairav, the Durham, and the Tzafon. And you'll see where he writes Yesod Binyamin on two sides. So both the Mairav and the Tzafon were completely in the Chelek of Binyamin. However, what happens is that the Shevet of Yehuda that had inherited in its territory most of the land of Yerushalayim, but nevertheless, in terms of the Mizbeach, that the territory of the Mizbeach must be that of Binyamin. That's the halacha. So you can't have a mizbeach on the territory of Yehuda. And the problem is because Yehuda sort of cuts in to Shevet Binyamin at the point of the mizbeach on two sides. The line of Yehuda goes all the way up on the Darom and on the top of the Mizrach. In fact, if you take a look at Rashi's diagram, you'll see that where Darom meets Mizrach, Rashi has no Amma, which would be above that corner, because that Amma represents the Yesod, and there couldn't be a Yesod at that corner because that area was designated for Yehuda, and the Mizbeach in its entirety has to be in the Chelik of Binyamin. So therefore, this corner, which we said is the Mizrach Darom, is Lo Haisa B'Chelko Shel Toref, was not in the territory that was inherited by Binyamin. The Omer of Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak, this is based on an earlier statement of Rav Shmuel, and he said, Mizbeach Ochel B'Chelko Shel Yehuda Amma. Now the word Ochel means to cut in, sort of to take over. So that the Mizbeach was to some extent on the territory of Yehuda. And the actual area where Yehuda cuts in to the Makom HaMizbeach is an Amma. It's one Amma. And that Amma is on the Chelek Darom Mizrach, and therefore there was no Yisod on that corner of the Darom Mizrach because you couldn't have the Mizbeach on the territory of Yehud. It had to be on the territory of Binyamin. And the Gemara adds, Omar of Levi bar Chama, Omar Rabbi Chambar, Ritzua hoisa yotza michelko shel Yehuda, v'nichnasa b'chelka shel Binyamin. That there was a strip of land that cut into from Yehuda that cut into the area or the portion of Binyamin, and that was all on the Darom side, right? You'll see where Yehuda has this line on the area of the Mizbeach. The Mizbeach here is a square, and Yehuda on the Darom, until he reaches the Mizrach, is a strip of land, and that's called a ritzua of land that cut into the area of Binyamin, meaning the Makom HaMizbeach. And there would be no Yisod, because as we said before, the Mizbeach could not be on the land of any other Shevet, even if it was Yehuda, it had to be on the land of Binyamin. Now, the impression you get here is that Binyamin wanted to have the entire Mizbeach in his territory, in his portion, and he therefore prayed that somehow that area that was a strip of land that cut into his area in the Makom HaMizbeach would be his. And that longing is indicative of his longing for the Shekhinah. So we start now today's daf, and we read the next part of the pasuk that is a bracha, not a bracha in this case of Yaakov for Binyamin, but rather a bracha of Moshe Rabbeinu for Binyamin. And it says in that pasuk, Chofef alav kol hayom. Now the word chofef is equivalent in the Hebrew to tsa'ar. And Rashi quotes a Gemara that refers to the Nazir, and the Nazir is chofef. Chofef means that, let's say you have an itchiness on your head, on your scalp, so that's called chofef. And Rashi says that it's ka'adam hamachashe v'doeg, so that Binyamin is represented here by someone who agonizes over the fact that he doesn't have the entire area of Mizbeach in his territory. Now that emotional state of Binyamin, which reflects his desire to be with the Shekhinah, is lefifach zacha Binyamin atzadik v'nasa ushpezichin la'kadosh baruch hu. Now ushpezichin means a host, meaning if you have an inn and you're in charge of the inn, you're called the ishpezichin. And the Beis Hamikdash is called it's the house into which we invite the Shekhinah. So we, so to speak, and specifically here, Binyamin, become the host, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is coming to, so to speak, Bimasher Shekhinah to visit us in the Makom HaMikdash. Now, where do we see that Binyamin was Zocher to become the Ushpezichin? Shenemar ubein kseifav shachen. And the Moshe Rabbeinu describes the area between the shoulders of Binyamin as that's where the Shekhinah is shachen. And all this is a a uh, a reward to Binyamin because of his tremendous longing and his agonizing over the fact that there was this strip of land of Yehuda, which in a sense robbed Binyamin from having the entire Mizbeach in his chelik. Meisvei, the Gemara asks the following question from a brisa: Olas ha'of ketzad hoisa nases. We're going to try to prove now from this brisa that there was in fact a yesod, a base on the Mizrach, Darom corner of the Mizbeach. Now we're talking about the avoda of the Olas Ha'of. And there's a kevesh, which we're going to talk about in the next part of the sugya. And that's where the Kohen would go up the kevesh. He would turn towards the sovev, which we discussed yesterday, and he comes immediately to the Daro Mizrach side corner of the Mizbeach. Molek es Rosha, right? An oaf, instead of shchita, as we mentioned many times, gets malika, and the malika requires mitzui hadam. Mimul orpa. Where did he put his nail, the nail of his thumb? He put it into the area which is parallel to the neck, and from there he would be mavdil. Now, this halach of havdalah is itself a sugya unto itself, but basically this is the halacha of olas ha'of. There's another sugya called chatas ha'of, but that doesn't require what we call havdalah. But olas ha'of requires havdalah. Havdalah means that you separate through this malika the head from the body. U'mimatzi dom al kir hamizbeach, right? And at some point, what the Kohen does is he squeezes the head such that the blood will now hit the kir, or the kosel of the mizbeach, the wall of the mizbeach. Now, ve'i amrit lo haya yisod is ba'avira bi'alma hudaka ovid. Okay, Rabbi Rhodes, I have to tell you, on this line of the Gemara that we're learning now, we could spend who knows how long. But let's just, for the purpose of a Daf Yomi, try to get the gist of what the Gemara is saying over here. The height of the Mizbeach, all told, again, it's made up of different parts, but all told, it's 10 amos high. Now, the yesod itself, the base of the Mizbeach, was 1 amma high. And then, to get to the upper half of the Mizbeach, you add another 5 amos to the 1 amma of the yesod, and you get 6 amos. From 6 to 9 will be another 3 amos, until you finally get to the Kronos HaMizbeach, on the Gag HaMizbeach, which is another amma, to complete the number 10. So the Gemara is assuming now, and we'll try to explain this based on Rashi, that when the Kohen does the Mitzvah Adam of the Olas Ha'of, he shows up from the Kevesh onto the southeastern corner of the Mizbeach where there is no Yesod. So how could he squeeze the Dam on an area that's just Avir? It's just airspace, because basically, right, the Mitzvah Adam is done on the outside of the Mizbeach, and there's no base at that point. So Rashi says, I don't understand. What do you mean there's no base? What do you mean? The Dam is going to go down on the floor of the Azor? That's not really true, because there was a ramp or shall we call it a ledge, on on that part of the Mizbeach, so that the ledge was 6 amos from the ground, and therefore when the Kohen would do the mitzvah, Rashi says, the dam would not go on the ground. It would not be stuck in the airspace, but rather would go onto this ledge. So why does the Gemara have a problem here? So Rashi explains that Olas Ha'of requires a mitzvah on the upper half of the Mizbeach. And if the Kohen goes up the Kevesh and now reaches the point of 6 amos onto the height of the Mizbeach, then there's 1 amma below where he's standing that is on the top half above the Chud HaSikra, above the first, the divider of the Mizbeach. So theoretically, what the Kohen could do in this mitzvah is he could lower his hand 1 amma below where he is standing. And that's Avira, because the ledge is only 6 amos high, and the upper half of the Mizbech is 5 plus Mashu. So the Gemara says the following. I amrit lo hayisod. If, according to everything that we've been assuming until now, on the southeast corner of the Mizbech there's no Yisod, is then Bavir Bi'alma Hudakavid. So Rashi's saying that since theoretically he could do the mitzvah above the Chud HaSikra for 1 amma below where he is, and there's no ledge, because the ledge is only at 6 amos high, then it's Bavir Bi'alma Hudakavid. The dam is now going to go down to the ground of the Azara, but it will not be on the Mizbeach. It'll be in the air of the Mizbeach. Omer of Nachman bar Yitzchak, Emar kach hisnu avira de binyamin karka de Yehuda. Gemara's machadesh, a new principle here, and that is that the avir above the ground of the territory of Binyamin, which again, as we said, the area that was allotted to Binyamin was the area of the Mizbeach, and therefore, even if the karka below belongs to Shevet Yehuda, because he got that segment and that territory, which is in the southeast corner of the Mizbeach, but nevertheless, the Avir itself belongs to Binyamin. And therefore, if the dam reaches the Avir, then that's enough to be machshir. In other words, the kedusha of the Avir is going to determine whether or not you have a fulfillment of the avodah of mitzvah adam, and that kedusha is the kedusha of Shevet Binyamin. So although usually in halacha the Avir belongs to the person who owns the karka below the Avir, but here, because we're not dealing with dinei momenos, with monetary law and choshe mishpat, and suing your neighbors or anything like that, but rather we're dealing with kedushas mizbeach, to be machshir the avodah, in this case of the olas ha'of. Therefore, that kedusha of the avir is the kedusha of Binyamin, and therefore, in effect, the dam is reaching the mizbeach of Binyamin, meaning because the mizbeach has to be on the shevet Binyamin. Okay, now the Gemara is going to introduce a machlokes Shin Rav and Levi. My lo havi lo yisod. We've been assuming until now that there is no yisod on the southeast corner of the Mizbeach. Is that really so? That itself is dependent upon a controversy between Rav and Levi. Rav Omar bibinyan. Rav says that the structure of the Mizbeach was such that there was no yisod at all on the southeast corner. Just physically it wasn't there. And that's how we understood it until now. But Levi Omar bidamim. Levi says that indeed the yisod was structured around the entire Mizbeach. There was no point in the Mizbeach where there was no yisod. But when we say that there was no yisod, what we mean is that at that point, as far as avodas hadamim is concerned, you could not do the avodas hadamim keneged that southeast corner because there's no yisod. What does it mean there's no yisod? There is yisod according to Levi, but there's no yisod as far as Heksher Adamim is concerned. So it's halacha in avoda. And now the Gemara is going to go through one brisa after another to try to either prove Rav Shita or disprove Rav. And the Gemara explains that the Yesod Hamachlokes feature, I shouldn't use the word Yesod, okay, but the fundamental issue and controversy between Rav and Levi is how to accept a Targum on a pasuk. Because the pasuk says, with regard to Parshas Vayechi and the blessing that was bestowed by Yaakov Avinu on Binyamin, so it says over there, let me just see if I have. The Binyamin Omar Yedid Hashem Yishkon, etc. Is Rav Metargem. Rav accepted the Targum. It seems to me that, by the way, there are two different texts of the Targum here. There's Rav's text and there's Levi's text. I don't know. And Rav says, Ba'achsante Yaspene Madbacha, which means that Be'achsante is in the portion of Binyamin. Yasvene Madbacha. Madbacha is in Aramaic the Mizbeach, and Yasbene is an Aramaic form of the Hebrew word binyan, of structuring. So the structure of the Mizbeach is in the section of Binyamin. And what that means is that the entire Mizbeach, without any exception, has to stand in the Chelik of Binyamin. So therefore, Rav comes to the conclusion that if part of the Mizbeach is in the Chelik of Yehuda, then that part of the Mizbeach is not really part of the Mizbeach, meaning they didn't structure the Mizbeach with that, in this case, the southeast corner, which was in the territory of Yehuda. But Levi Mitargem, Bachsante Yaspine Makdasha, instead of Madbecha, he's got Magdasha, which means that in the territory of Binyamin, the Kedusha should be there. Makom Mekudesh L'Damim. So any point which is Mekudesh L'Damim for the Avodas Adam, that has to be in the area of Shevet Levi. That which is on the southeast corner is not sanctified with the sanctity for Avodas Adamim, even though physically it was part of the square of the Mizbeach, because there was a Yesod that was built according to Levi, even on that southeast corner. Okay, now we start with the entire Seder of Brisos, one Brisa after the other, to challenge Rav or to support Rav. But first, the Gemara wants to support Rav. That's not going to last very long, but at least for one breath of air, we can bring a stira to Levi. Because Toshma, the Brisa says, now this is not even a Brisa, this is a Mishnah. And this, I believe, is a Mishnah in Masechta Midos. And the Mishnah says that Hayisod Hayamahalech al Pnei Kol Hatzafon Val Pnei Kol Amarav. Right, there were two sides of the Mizbeach, and that is both the northern side of the Mizbeach and the western side of the Mizbeach, where the Yesod completely covered those two directions of the Mizbeach, because those were purely 100% in Shevet Binyamin. But Ochel Badoram Ama Achas Uba Mizrach Ama Achas. But nevertheless, there's Ochel means like a penetration almost, or a seizing, I guess the word seize, that one Amma on the south side, one Amma on the eastern side was seized, it was taken away. And it means that on the south and the eastern side, there is no Yisod. I mean, Levi said there is a Yisod, just as it doesn't have Kedushas Damim. So the Gemara answers, my Ochel Nami, the word Ochel doesn't mean, as we thought it means, that, it's the physical, cutting off of the south or the eastern side of the Mizbeach and there's no Yisod. No, b'damim. It means, as far as damim is concerned, it was, so to speak, it was cut off. Toshma. Now we begin a series of brisos that challenge Rav. We're going to have 1, 2, 3 brisos. Brisa number 1, Toshma. And again, we're going back to that same Mishnah in Masechta Midos. Let me just double check if they tell you here where that is. Bays. Okay, I'm not finding it right this second. Oh, I think it's Perek Gimel Mishnah Aleph. Okay. So it says HaMizbeach Shloshim Ushtayim Al Shloshim Ushtayim. Now, the indication here in this Mishnah in Midos is that the Mizbeach is a square that's made up of 32 amos in the width and 32 amos in the length. So it's 32 amos square, which makes it into a square. Now, according to Rav, the Mizbeach is not a square because part of the Mizbeach had no base to it. So you can't say that the base all around. Now, if you go like Levi, on the other hand, and you have 32 amos here and 32 amos here, so that means that the base actually surrounded the entire Mizbeach. And the Gemara answers, Hachamai Askinon min hatzad. In other words, there were two sides of the Mizbeach that were absolutely complete and would have 32 amos. And that is the northern side and the western side, because there, Shevet Yehuda had no claim to fame. So the Mishnah is not telling us that the Mizbeach was a square. No. The Mizbeach was not a square because we're going like Rav. But rather, the two areas were 32 amos long or wide, and those are on the west and the north. Oh, so Rashi adds here that if you look at the southern or the eastern side, then it's only 31 amos because we subtract 1 amma for the Yisod. The Yisod was removed, or was never there to begin with, actually, according to Rav. Oh, so Tosas here is bothered by the fact that there's a separate halacha. The Rambam codifies this in Hilchos Beis HaBechira in Perek Beis, that the Mizbeach has to be square. So according to Rav, we're saying that the Mizbeach is not square. But the answer is that if you go on top of the Mizbeach, then Enoch Hinami, the Mizbeach is square even according to Rashi. On the bottom of the base of the Mizbeach, it's not square. I mean, the logic here is with Tosas, because ultimately the purpose of the Mizbeach is the Eish al Gabi Mizbeach that burns the Murim and so forth, the Haktorah. So if it's square on the top, that should be enough. Who cares about the base? Toshma, second brisa to support Levi against Rav. And this is again a Mishnah in Masechta Midos, which is in the third Mishnah in the third parak, but it's also a sugya later on Daf Samach Beis. Again, this sugya that we're learning today really has to be learned together in conjunction with a sugya on Samach Beis. Nimtza poreach amo al yisod. Now, wait a second. What we're saying is that the kevesh extends 1 amma over the yisod, al ha-yisod. Al yisod means it sort of flows over the yisod. And not only that, but the kevesh also overflows 1 amma on the sovev. The sovev, as we said before, is the ledge where the Kohen would walk around the Mizbeach. Now, according to Rav, this doesn't make any sense because on the south side or the eastern side, and that, well, let's go back to the Kevish. The Kevish is actually on the Durham. So how could we say that it extends over the base? In the Durham, there is no base, according to Rav. And the Gemara answers, Ema keneged Ama Yisod vi Ama Yisovev. All right, the Gemara sort of like reinterprets this Mishnah in Midos, and to say that the Kevish extends over the Amma, that corresponds to the Yisod, which means that although the base on the south side, right, would run only for a certain amount, but there would be an Amma where it didn't reach, but nevertheless, the Kevish covered the area where the base would have been had it run completely around the Mizbeach. So where would it have been? That's what the subject of this mission is. And finally, the Gemara says, Toshma, to Tani Levi taught in a Brisa. Now, it's very interesting that Levi is bringing a Brisa to support his opinion. Okay, fine. Anyway, Ketzad Bonim es HaMizbeach. How did they structure the Mizbeach? So there was something called a Malbein. A Malbein is like a wooden frame, right? And they brought this gigantic wooden frame in order to prepare the Mizbeach. And Mevin Malbein Shu Shloshim Ushtayim al Shloshim Ushtayim. So it was 32 amos by 32 amos. One second. So what's the kasha on Rav? V'govo amma. Okay, his height was on amma. Umevi chaluke avonim mufulamos. Mufulamos, I think, means dam, and chiluke avonim are smooth. Halak means smooth. Right, but this halacha mizbeach. Again, you have to know a lot more about the mizbeach. But basically, all the stones of the mizbeach had to be smoothed. And the halacha was you're not allowed to smooth out a stone for the mizbeach by using any sort of metal file. So they took the stones from the sea, and apparently the pounding of the waves, I'm looking at waves right now, of the waves against the sea would smooth off the top of the stones in such a way that there wouldn't, this is Gemara in Chulin, that there wouldn't even, the Gemara compares it to the knife of the shechita, that if you draw your fingernail across, you would not catch any nick. Okay then. So these are the stones that, just practically speaking, they were able to obtain with the smoothness from the seashore. Ben gedolos, ben ketanos, right? And some of them were larger, some of them were smaller. Umevi sid v'kunya v'zefes, right? He brings lime, lead glaze, tar, umamche v'shofech. He dissolves them all together, pours the mixture over the stones. V'zehu yisod. And this is going to be the base of the Mizbech. Chosu maybe Malbein. Then he brings again another form of this, this kind of a frame. Shushloshim Amma al Shloshim Amma. V'govo Chamish Amos. Umevi Chaluke Avonim. Again, the same process. Okay, so all these have to do with the different levels of the Mizbeach. V'govo Gimel Amos, umevi Chaluke v'hu Mokom Hamarocha, v'chozu umevi Malbein Shu Amo al Amo, umevi Chaluke Avonim Fuloros, v'gedolos v'ketanos, maybe Zefes v'kunya Malcha v'shofech, v'chein l'chol keren u'keren, and that's what they did. Zel keren for every single keren. Now, the Brisa says that when they made that first block, if you recall, and they formed the Yisod, there was a square of 32 amos by 32 amos. And we said, according to Rav, that can't be, because you're going to have to subtract an amma from the southeast side, and there was no Yisod. So how can you tell me in this brisa that in the first block that they made, and they formed the yesod, the base of the mizbech. It was a square of 32 amos by 32 amos.